Oh, it's working now.
I think so.
I did it. I'm so proud of me.
No, it does take about 20
Oh, sorry.
seconds. So, yeah, basically.
Okay, so we're live. Oh my gosh.
Yay, well done.
Hooray, thank you. I'm very proud of myself. Should I let everyone else in?
Yeah, we can let people in. We've got 6 people in the waiting room, and I'm sure we'll get some more trickling in because.
And also, we have the lovely people on YouTube.
Oh yes, we do. We've got people via YouTube too. That's fun. Yeah. Okay, exciting. Right.
I can't believe Hooray, thank you. Account. I'm very proud of myself.
You might want to
let everyone else in.
Stream on your. We've got 6 people in the waiting room, and I'm sure we'll get some more trickling in because.
And also, we have lovely people on YouTube.
Oh yes, we do. We've got people via YouTube too. That's
Can
fun.
you hear that?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna.
Hooray, thank you. I'm very proud of myself.
You might want to.
Sorted. That was very confusing.
Okay.
I need some milk now. Yeah, I'm gonna turn off the camera because no one wants to see this. But yeah, it would be probably great if our participants could have their cameras on, just so.
Yeah, it'd be lovely. I think it makes it a lot. Yes, it makes it a lot nicer, I think, for everyone to have their cameras on for the speaker. We have the lovely Marta Ferrer with us. She's a producer at Euronews and has also done a multitude of freelance work and some work for BBC Sport too. I'm Shannon, your Southeast officer. This is today's SPA Southeast conference. It's going pretty well so far. Thank you to everyone that's been attending the talks. I'm going to kind of hand over to Mart now, and she can do the rest of the talking.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me as well. Apologies if my Wi-Fi cuts out. It's been consistently brilliant throughout lockdown, and then the last week has just decided it doesn't want to work anymore. So sorry if I vanish. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I trained and did the NCTJ with News Associates back. I started in September 2018 and finished in January 2019. I did that up here in Manchester. You can probably tell from my accent. I'm not from Manchester. I'm from London and the kind of Surrey, London area. But I moved up to Manchester a few years ago because the media scene's really exciting here, and I really wanted to train at News Associates, and it was a really affordable way of doing that because I couldn't afford to live in London. So it was, yeah, really, really big fan and big supporter of Manchester-based journalism, as much as I know everyone here is Southeast. But yeah, so like Shannon said, I currently work for Euronews. So I'm a producer and a journalist there. So I predominantly work on Euronews Living, which is one of our verticals, so our sort of magazines that are strictly digital. So Euronews Living used to be our kind of luxury lifestyle vertical a few years ago. And then early last year, it pivoted to being purely about the climate. So we're environmental, we're sustainability, very solutions focused journalism. And I, at the time when I started, I'd been at BBC Sport for a few months full time as a freelancer. Where I worked on the social desk, which was great fun. I learned so much there. And I think there's a real, well, sports journalism and then moving from sports to environmental journalism doesn't seem like the most natural step. It was really exciting because it sort of gave me a real flavour of how social media journalism works, which is obviously what I'm here to talk about today and what I'm really passionate about. So I was at BBC Sport, and we were set to have the most amazing summer of sport last year. Obviously, I was working on stuff to do with the Euros, the Olympics, there was Tour de France, Wimbledon, everything. And then by April last year, obviously, that was no more. I mean, a small part of a much more significant thing that was happening, but it meant that my year looked very, very different. And I got picked up by Euronews to kind of sort out their socials for Euronews Living, initially on a 3-month contract, and then I've been extended, so I'm here full time now, which is really exciting. And yeah, that's sort of my more recent background. Before I was a journalist, I worked in international development, partly for comms, partly marketing, partly project management. It was a real mishmash of things, and that I think gave me a lot of really cool skills that have been really useful in journalism, but also more specifically for social media. And before that, I worked as a theatre producer and director, which is totally different like world, and very, very different from journalism. But one of the things that I've sort of realised in my career is that I really love social media. From working in it in marketing to then moving into journalism and sort of social media journalism, it's been a really, really interesting process. And I think it's something in the world of media that we're still on the cusp of it being understood. It's not quite, you don't walk into every, you walk into every newsroom and you look at their sort of their digital writers or their video team, they all work in roughly the same way. Social media isn't like that. I've yet to come across a team that has like a consistent look and feel from another team. I know from friends who work at ITV, like their social media team is fantastic. The stuff they're putting out is some of the best in the country. But I know that they're still quite nascent. They're still kind of at the start of what they're doing. BBC Sports, when I was there were sort of 12 or so regular full-time or freelancers who would be working on a rota. You'd probably have between 4 and 5 of you on a shift a day just for social media, and that's things like live tweeting news, live tweeting events, matches, everything. And that is, that's a really well-oiled machine, and it's an incredible operation there. At Euronews it's so different, and it's still so small. I mean, Euronews is a much smaller operation, but it's so different, and it's really interesting sort of being on the cusp of that. And the reason I'm so passionate about social media journalism is because I think for years, for too long in fact, editors and publishers were seeing social media as something that was an extension of marketing. You'll find quite often that social media journalists, the social media managers, would actually sit in the marketing and the PR teams rather than the editorial teams. And that's changing, and that's really exciting because it's not marketing, and it's nothing like marketing. I've worked in marketing, I love it, it's really interesting. It's a totally different game, totally different set of skills, totally different ways of using social media. And it makes our jobs as kind of journalists and producers working in social really difficult, because when you're looking for guidance or advice or sort of precedents even, it's really hard because all of the material that you're reading is about brands trying to boost their message or boost sales, and that's not what we're doing. And one of the reasons I think it's so important is obviously we all know how massive social media is. And when I was thinking the other day where I get my news from, it's very, very rare that I log in and I go to a news site. I will read articles through social media, whether it's because I follow those papers, those outlets, those broadcasters, or because a friend shared it. But it's very, very rare that I log into The Guardian. I read The Guardian every day. The number of times I've actually typed Guardian into my web browser is incredibly few. And that's because we get it through social media. And I think there's so much psychology behind how we click, why we click, what we read, how do you get the perfect tweet? Things like balancing, does the tweet give away too much information and therefore you don't need to read the article? Does it give away too little so the readers feel forced to click and then you get into the realm of clickbait? It's super interesting, and I could rant about it all day, and I do to my colleagues who are constantly on the receiving end of me annoyingly critiquing their tweets and their Facebook posts. But yeah, that's sort of a bit about what I feel and where I'm up to with this. And I think one of the big stats for me is the fact that right now in the UK, 50% of people consume their news through social media, and that's including all the demographics. So if you think about younger audiences, which is who like media outlets are trying to target right now, at the BBC there's a huge push for younger audiences, which is 13 to 25. Those demographics, it's way more. And then with the rise of things like TikTok and the way that Instagram is moving as well, such an interesting sphere, and there's so much that can be done here. And I think it's a really exciting place to work. And I think it's one of those skills that I think more and more journalists, you're expected to be multi-hyphenated, you're expected to be able to do lots of different things at once. Social is going to be one of those increasingly, I think, as we all go through our careers, really. But yeah, that's a bit about me so far. I don't know if there's any questions or other avenues I can go down with this. Oh, you're muted, Shan.
Like, how is that? Have I not learned after a year of doing stuff like this? I invite people to ask questions on the chat. It might make things a little bit easier, but then if Mart's in the process of like answering your question, feel free to unmute if you want to elaborate more on your point. I would like to ask a question to kick things off, and I would like to ask, what do you think is like the biggest challenge and the biggest success of like what you do with Euronews right now when it comes to like Euronews Living's relationship with social media?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question and probably quite a big one. So Euronews Living's journey with social media has been really interesting. When I started, I mean, Euronews Living is still a tiny team. Like, it's an amazing team, but it's still really, really tiny. So when I started, there were 3 people who were video producing, editing the whole platform, and writing all the features and doing all the metrics and doing all the data. I mean, it was a huge operation being run by 3 people. So each of them were doing a social platform. But at that point, it's just a let's share a link, because that's all you've got time for. You haven't got time to kind of curate it. So I think when I started, I think the average monthly reach on social media was about 20,000. And we've sort of really shaped our strategy. Everyone works on it. It's not just like me taking over and doing it all. Like, it's very much a collaboration between everyone on the team. But I know by September last year, we reached 6 million people. So we've gone from 20,000 to 6 million in the space of about 6 months, slightly under that. And then obviously, like yesterday, we had one tweet that hit 8.2 million impressions, which is just mad in terms of the numbers.
Elaborate on that for those that
Yes, that was our really bizarre viral piece about Spinach sending emails. I don't know if anyone saw that on Twitter. It was being discussed a lot yesterday, which was really odd. And that was an article I wrote on Monday. And it was starting to do, so this is an example actually of how kind of social media is so much more than just a place where you put links. I wrote the piece on Monday, shared it on Twitter, did quite well, had about 80 likes because it's a funny headline and a quite a cool story. And then I spotted that more and more people were sharing the article and making funny comments. So I used Twitter's Moments function, which is a really, really cool piece to use. And that's, you'll see that on the explore bar and on the trending section. Moments is just a way of curating tweets. Anyone can do it, whether you're a verified, public, private, whatever, anyone can curate a moment. And it's just a way of selecting different tweets. You want to make sure there's a bit of a narrative to it, or it's sort of vaguely thematically linked, and you always want the last tweet to sort of sum it up so that it's kind of like one long read, basically. So I threw a moment together on Monday evening, and I sent it to the UK Moments team at Twitter, which is such a long shot, like everyone's making moments, but for whatever reason they decided to feature it, which was really lucky, because I woke up the next morning and we had just thousands and thousands of comments and replies. And one of my friends sent me a weird meme that someone had done. This was the first thing I saw when I woke up yesterday morning, that had like 30,000 likes, and it was like a screenshot of our article with like a funny reply. And by the end of the day yesterday, it was just, the numbers on the website were insane, but the numbers on Twitter, I still haven't managed to unmute our notifications because they're still just going. But that was a really exciting way of seeing, like, using the tools within the platform to really generate growth. So it's more than just like sharing a link, it's using what's existing on Twitter, which is the Moments function, to do that. And I guess that's like back to what you were saying, Shannon, that's the biggest challenge on social media for Euronews, but also for everyone, is that there's loads of platforms and they all work differently. So Twitter, like, without going into the real specifics of like algorithms, because I could talk about that forever, but it bores everyone other than me. But Twitter doesn't care if you're sharing links, doesn't care, doesn't punish you for that. Obviously, the better your stuff performs, the more it's going to show you to people. So you can use Twitter as like a link farm, effectively. You just share all your stories. You want to do it well, and there's like a knack to that, but it doesn't matter about links or not links. Facebook, on the other hand, doesn't like links so much. So you have to limit how many links you share. You want to be creating more content that's for Facebook and keeps people in Facebook. So things like videos. But this is one of the biggest things that we started to do at Euronews, which is at Euronews Living, which is the only reason we got such a big reach, which is creating content for social. So it's social first content. It's not trying to get people back onto the website. It's trying to keep them in our platform and on our account, on our page, you know, commenting, whatever. And that's been the biggest lesson for us. And that's something I learned at BBC Sport, which they do so well there. If you look on their Facebook, there's loads of ways of generating interaction. And this is where Instagram comes into it, because Instagram is such a fascinating space and it's such an important place. And I think it's somewhere that a lot of outlets are still quite tentative about, because obviously you can't link. So a lot of people are like, well, why would I use it? Because you can't link a post to an article. So what am I going to use it for? But people are now starting to see the benefit of having your own ready-made audience in it. I mean, that's been really only over the last kind of couple of years. And that's what we started to do. So we did a lot of graphic posts, we did a lot of explainers, we did a lot of pieces with very long form captions where the reader feels satisfied at the end. They're not left with more questions or a need to kind of go and find your website, because Instagram doesn't like you taking its users out of its platform. And that's sort of, that's one of the biggest things that we've sort of learned and been building on as a team. And then on Instagram, obviously they launched Reels in June. And that's been a huge space to kind of try to generate some action from. That's hopefully that sort of answers. But it's basically the distinction between the different platforms is hard, and it means it's a bit all encompassing.
Yeah, I imagine it is. I think that was really useful, so thank you. Got a question. How can a student journalist use social media in the way that actual journalists at companies are doing to highlight their work or get a higher audience reach?
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard for student journalists, because you're trying to build a following and trying to build an audience. And you're often in this weird space where if you've just come to student journalism, you've probably got an existing Twitter presence or social presence at this point, and you've got to decide whether you use your personal and make it professional. There's all kinds of different things to navigate there. So I think making sure that whichever space you use is dedicated to work, because there's nothing worse than, and you know, so many journalists have found this recently, particularly ones about my age, I'm in my mid-20s, have found old tweets being dredged up and silly things they posted years ago being dredged up. So you always want to be really careful on what you're using and whether it's better to kind of start again with that, which is always, you know, a decision to be made. In terms of its use, engaging with other journalists is so important. Following their work, responding to their work. I mean, not being a reply guy, kind of constantly in the comments, giving a running commentary on one particular journalist's work, because we all have someone like that in our comments and we all have the same feeling on that. But, you know, engaging with other people, engaging with people's work, sharing other people's work is so important, because it, you know, and it's also just good to be reading other people's work as well. I think there's different knacks to different platforms. I think at the moment, if you're starting out, places like TikTok and using Instagram Reels, that's a really exciting space to be working in. Doing explainer videos, like explaining what your article is about. It can feel slightly awkward, especially, and this is why I mentioned personal versus private spaces. My Instagram is, I mean, it's on public, but it's not a workspace for me. My Twitter is a workspace. So I wouldn't be posting explainer videos because it's just my friends following me and I think they'd find it really, really odd. But for other people, it is a space, you know, if you have a work Instagram, Reels are fantastic for that. They're generating so much interaction because it's Instagram's big function at the moment. So things like Reels, things like using TikTok as well. There's not that many journalists on TikTok, but there's a real want for good quality content. I really recommend, obviously I work in the environmental sector, but really recommend looking at the team behind EcoTalk. So that's people like Abby Richards, who did the conspiracy theory pyramid, and she's gone viral for kind of talking about QAnon and explaining stuff to do with that. She's fantastic. She uses TikTok and Instagram in a really interesting way. She makes really fabulous, engaging videos about, you know, different topics, and they trend because they're just really good and really funny. But that's a really interesting way of starting to use social media to share your work. It's a bit different. There's a guy at the Mirror who does this really well on TikTok as well. Can't remember his name for the life of me, but he explains different videos, different fun things that he finds interesting, and I know he's generated a lot of traction from there. as far as Twitter goes, that's obviously like a really good place to kind of build a presence, because it's where most journalists are. Be careful with being too political if you want to work in a particular like sector later on. That's just something to be mindful of. I know I had to be quite careful when I started working at BBC and had to really, really curate what I had and hadn't said already, because obviously there's such strict guidelines on sharing political and personal beliefs. Twitter's a really, really cool space for finding new people, but also for sharing your work with new audiences and engaging, you know, Greenpeace, for example, if they've just published a big report and you've written a story about it, sharing that, tagging them in it, they're really, really reactive. That's a great way of starting to generate conversations. But also using social media to find stories. When I was a student journalist, the first piece I ever had in national news was a story I came across in a Facebook group. It was about a mum who was doing an Ironman in Arizona, and she like breastfed or was pumping milk during the run. It was amazing. The visuals were incredible, and I found her, got her story, called up a news agency and was like, I've got this story, would you take a freelance submission? And I think 2 days later, I think it was Mail Online had it, New York Post, it was in the Oprah magazine, it was in People, went on to Australia. It was massive. And that's just a story I found like in a random Facebook group. So there's a real potential to use social media as an input as well as an output for your own work. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I also wanted to ask you, and feel free, guys, to pop questions in the chat. I also wanted to ask you, like, with regards to like tools and stuff, like I still haven't found my way around TweetDeck properly, but like, is there any advice you could give these guys on like what tools to be using, what works, what doesn't work when it comes to maybe searching for stories?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of stuff on Twitter in particular, you come across just by being on it every day and by following different people and seeing different conversations. That's not very helpful advice. That's like, let social media be quite all consuming, which it is for a lot of us already, which is a problem. But yeah, Twitter is one of those ones where often by the time it's already massively trending, it's too, like everyone else has already covered it. You're not going to be able to get a story out of it. TweetDeck's a good one. I really like TweetDeck. Curating lists of people is really good. So if you've got people who, remember I follow quite a lot of people who do like press and comms for different like NGOs and charities, but really, really small charities, because they're more likely to be tweeting about their work and sharing things before they've even necessarily hit the wires. So that's a good way of sort of finding stories. I also, that's more of a work thing, but you can sort of filter who is sharing different stories based on where they are. So you can put in a keyword and you can then filter it so it's only verified accounts that you're listening to, which I wouldn't recommend if you're looking for stories, because if a verified account has done it, it's probably already done. But things like, yeah, you can put in keyword searches, you can then filter it by location. So I've got things like sustainable travel, but I've got it only from Europe. And then I will often find like releases that have come through from that, and that's quite useful. The other platform that's really massive, but it's difficult to get access to as a freelancer or an individual, you normally have to get it through an organization, but it's CrowdTangle, because that shows you what's trending and what's overperforming around the world on different platforms. The one platform I've also not talked about is Reddit, which is absolutely fantastic for spotting things. Sometimes it's not out of date, but you might find like a picture is trending on there that actually there was a news story on it 5 years ago, and it's just that this picture has like come back up and is interesting again. But Reddit is an absolute gold mine, but it's another one where you sort of have to really spend time looking in the different subreddits that are of interest. So for example, the environment one is massive, but at the side, when you go on that one, it's got a list of like 15 other ones, like other sort of subreddits that are relevant. So biodiversity or water or clean energy, there's more and more and more specific ones, and they're great for finding content and finding stories.
Brilliant. I also wanted to ask, this kind of backtracks a little bit on the social media front, but my plan is to ask every speaker about kind of their roots into what they do now. So I know that you discussed that a bit at the beginning, but like specifically for doing social media stuff at the BBC, like how did that come about for you? Was it a formal application process? Did you approach someone? Like what would you advise?
a strange way in. I think that's often the lesson in journalism is I still don't think I've had a job where there's been like a formal job posting. Certainly not in journalism. And I'm not particularly well connected in journalism. There's no like, it's not the secretly my grandfather is like the editor of the Telegraph, as was going around on Twitter the other day, of someone giving helpful advice to journalists. I'm not connected in that sense at all. So part of what helped me, and I know this isn't necessarily helpful for people who are currently students, is that I didn't go into journalism straight away. So I had I did other things in other sectors, and that really helped with my CV just for looking a bit different. And journalism it had been the plan, and then it absolutely wasn't the plan. So already like my CV looked a bit odd and looked a bit different, which is useful. And I know a lot of really great journalists who have left, been on the sort of more formal career path, gone into something else for a bit, often in the charity sector, which is something I really recommend if anyone's ever looking for work and feeling a bit lost in journalism. Looking at stuff in charity comms is absolutely fantastic, and you get such interesting exposure to such interesting people. It means now that I can write on international development and child welfare in a way that I couldn't have done before. But that's a slight digression. So after I finished my NCTJ, throughout being a student journalist, I was pitching and I was getting published places and I was doing shifts at like news agencies and stuff. So that was already helping. And then obviously I'm up in Manchester, which is where a big chunk of the BBC is, particularly BBC Sports. And there they were looking for freelancers. They open their freelance pool every so often. It's the same in London as well. They open their news pool. And I went through that. I know BBC Sport have actually got it open again at the moment. So they're looking for freelancers in all areas. And I did a sort of initial sort of trial session where they tested a few of my skills, and I did like practice match report writing. I'm not a football fan. So, and I think I'd watched one football match at this point ever. So you can imagine how absolutely excruciating that was for me. And I imagine Reese, who had to read it as well. But what they realised is that while I probably wasn't going to go down the live reporting route straight away for the Premier League, I did have the right tone for social media. So I started getting some social media shifts, which then opened up other avenues within the BBC as well. So I ended up doing some project-based work with the Get Inspired team. So I did a lot of stuff for what was going to happen with the Euros. We were running this big like grassroots program. And then in October, I took on an extra project on the side with them, working on Sports Personality of the Year as well, which was really like so much fun. So yeah, that was sort of how I got into it, was going through this freelance pool system. And then starting off with a few shifts. I was also working for Reach PLC, like what was Trinity Mirror, on their trending news team. I think they might be looking again at the moment, actually. They're often looking. And that was sitting in their Manchester office, taking stories that were really overperforming on their regional sites and then rewriting it for a national audience. But again, that had a bit of social media element in it, in that you were kind of looking at what was really performing well on, I don't know, like Cornwall Live's Facebook page, and what were the comments saying and what were they asking, and how could you then rewrite that story for a national audience. So that is sort of how I got there with the BBC. I left for a bit and I did 4 months in PR, which I didn't like because I didn't like where I was. I worked in other PR jobs that have been fantastic. And I think as a journalist, having PR experience was really good, just because you learn how to work with PRs as well, which is such an essential skill. And I had been so overwhelmed by PR emails before, and I now understand how to kind of build those relationships much, much, much better. But yeah, I did 4 months in PR and then went back to BBC full time last November. And then obviously on to Euronews. But that's sort of my slightly odd journey, if that makes sense.
No, I think it's brilliant because I think we've got a lot of people speaking today, and I think out of everyone, you've got the most like diverse background when it comes to like jumping between different industries, and I think that's really exciting.
I say that to my husband though, because he's constantly like, could you just have one job, please? Because he's worked at one job for like 7 years, and he's worked in his current job for 2 years. He works in finance, so the idea of jumping around like we do in the media is just like very stressful for him.
Mrs. Rabbit and Peppa Pig.
Yeah, so yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think a lot of student journalists are under the impression that you've got to do everything very clear cut. Like, admittedly, that's what I've done. We like gone from student publication to NCTJ and then on to shifting and such. But yeah, I think it's really valuable. And I've heard also that the BBC do favour people that have a little bit of something different about them. Like was it Sophia Smith Gala? Like, she didn't study journalism and she's like one of their like hottest properties right now. I think she studied languages or something. Yeah, which I just think is really exciting, makes you stand out a little bit more. I know the lovely Charlotte asked on the chat about what you learned from these experiences that's like transferable, which I know you've touched on a little bit more, but is there anything else?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I as in like what I did before journalism.
Well, yeah.
Your third sector stuff and PR.
Yeah, this is one of the things I've had to kind of learn, is that like there's value, even when I've been in jobs that weren't necessarily what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, trying to figure out what the sort of key takeaways were that I would enjoy and that, you know, I could still take from an experience. And that's been so crucial. So working, my very first job when I graduated was actually as an educational consultant and a writer. So my degree's in education. I'd worked as a teacher before then. So I was doing a bit of like sort of educational content writing, and that taught me so much about how my own brain worked. That was really gave me so much insight, made me realize a few years down the line I have ADHD, which is why I think I thrive in social media journalism, because it's so like quick and it suits my brain, sometimes in an unhelpful way. But yeah, writing sort of educational content was great, and it gave me such great insight into how different like systems and bits of the sectors kind of in like a public sector sense fit together, which was then essential when I did public affairs with my NCTJ. It meant like I knew exactly how Ofsted worked, I knew how academies worked, I knew how, you know, what's the process of going from a, you know, maintained state school to an academy, what's the difference between a faith school and, you know, VC school. All of that stuff was actually really, really useful when I was training, and has continued to be useful in different roles. So that was really useful. Moving into the third sector was really fascinating. I did a lot of having to speak to people. It meant, you know, by the time I was halfway through that job, I could pick up the phone to anyone, whether it was, you know, a member of the royal family who I had to work with, or like a massive football star who was a big donor, or like this little old lady who'd given us like £10 a month for the last 30 years. And just knowing how to deal with these different people, and being able to speak to different people and both get what I wanted out of them, but also making sure that they had a really good experience, has been so useful for interviewing. I've had a lot of friends who've had to jump into some really difficult interviewing situations, from doing like death knocks to, you know, grabbing people outside a court case or outside coronary like reports. That's really hard. And while I haven't had to do too much of that, working in the third sector and dealing with people kind of day in, day out was so valuable. But I think that's the kind of skill you also get from things like working in retail and things like working in the service sector. You know, that you get a lot of those skills of just knowing how to deal with people. And while some of the very best journalists I know went straight from uni or straight from school onto a training course and then into the media, I will say that there are a lot of people who actually, when they've come from these different lines and these different had these different experiences, are much, not exclusively, but are often able to deal with interviews and people in a slightly more nuanced way. And I think that's really, yeah, it's really, really useful. It's really valuable for me. And I think, yeah, it's a good skill. And I think that's one of the things that I would like to emphasize massively. Obviously, it's not social media specifically, but I remember when I was training, and even before then, I was constantly looking at like other people who had the jobs that I wanted or were doing what I wanted. Often while I was sitting in jobs that I found really frustrating and that I wasn't enjoying, or going through a really bad period at work. PR job last year, if I could have told myself while I was in that job in the end of 2019 that this is where I'd be, I'd been so happy. But I think one of the things to emphasize is that absolutely every single experience, even if it feels really detached from media or whatever you want to do, there is so much value in it. And I know that I can say that slightly smugly now, feeling where I am and being very happy with where I am. But, you know, working as a swimming teacher when I was 16 or a lifeguard, knowing how to deal with really difficult parents and trying to get someone not to behave really badly in the pool, those have been skills that have been useful going forward. That's slightly more like preachy than I meant it to be, but hopefully that's useful.
I also want, you touched on the NCTJ. Mark, to my knowledge, is a whiz at shorthand. I believe you got awarded. You did. I believe you got awarded for getting like the best 100 words per minute like in the country or something. So I just wondered if you had any insight on, you know, these guys might be contemplating their next steps. Do you think the NCTJ is the way to go? How useful did you find it?
Yeah. No, this is like a question that I've people have had a lot for me on like NCTJ, and like when I've been talking to you know, friends who are older, friends who are younger, friends who are, you know, just starting out in their careers, whether or not to do an NCTJ. I did it over a master's because actually I'd already, was quite a practical decision for me. I did a part-time master's in London because I was bored and apparently don't have enough things to do. So I'd already used up my funding for that, basically. So for me, it was sort of NCTJ was actually just the most affordable route. In retrospect, I now understand what it is. I now understand what it represents. I now understand why it was useful. I loved it. I thought it was a really great experience. News Associates, where I trained, is fantastic. I know a lot of the London guys as well. They're really brilliant there. The Manchester team are equally fantastic. What I will say about the NCTJ is that it is old-fashioned. It is very old-fashioned print journalism. It's learning how to go and do local reporting. So it meant when I did shifts at Manchester Evening News, I knew what I was doing. You know, I knew how to find the story. I know how you write it. I know how you know, do this and the next thing. I know the rules of court reporting and all of that stuff. It's not currently that well set up for digital learning and digital journalism, but I don't think any course is. I don't think that's a fault of the NCTJ. I think it's the fact that, you know, I don't think any industry has moved as much as media and is moving as rapidly. You know, if you imagine trying to write a guide to using social media 2 years ago, it's completely different now. You know, it wouldn't have TikTok on it, wouldn't have Reels on it, wouldn't have all these different things that we use. So I think it's, you know, it's not a fault of the NCTJs, but it is a much more old-fashioned like publication, like way of training, but I think invaluable for that reason as well. For me, it taught me how to write. It taught me how to write fast. I was like a strong writer when I was at uni. You know, I was good at writing essays, was good at, you know, doing other kinds of writing, was good when I went into content writing as well, but did not know how to structure reports. And when I work with freelancers now, both ones I've commissioned for features, but also ones that we work with in our team as well, you can really see people who've had that training, who know the difference between like a lead and a stand first, and know what you need to get in the first full pars, when do the quotes come in, how do you balance this, how do you write a really, really good first line. That is really valuable. And that doesn't matter whether you're writing for the website, whether you're writing for social, whether you're writing for newspaper. Those are pretty kind of fundamental tenets, I guess. Shorthand wise, yes, I somehow got 100% accuracy on 100 words a minute. Still literally do not understand how that happened. Yeah, it was really, really bizarre. I failed the one I took the week after the one I passed. So I got, it wasn't great. I used it a bit, shorthand, and I think if I'd gone a more traditional route, I think I'd use it more. I'm trying to get back in the habit of using it more for interviews, because that's where it's got real benefit. I remember when I was doing it, I was really frustrated. And I was like, I don't want to learn this. I don't want to use it. I don't need it. But also I'm like really, really competitive. So I was quite determined to do it. But I was a Guardian journalist actually in the North who came and spoke to us, and she was explaining how she used it, and it totally transformed my perception of it. And the way that, you know, what she was explaining is that she had this amazing exclusive interview. I can't remember what the story was. It was a massive one, and she had the exclusive. They needed that story out by the end of the day after she did the interview. She sat down, did a 2-hour interview with them, and her point was, I don't have 2 hours to listen back to that full interview and transcribe every single line, but she can look through her notes and go, yes, this is the key quote. You're not writing down every single thing in those 2 hours, but it meant that she could produce a really fantastic piece of work based on her shorthand notes. And then I started to understand the value of that. I've not used it hugely. For a long time, it was mainly just used to write like rude messages about my husband on our blackboard so he couldn't understand it. That was my ongoing game for a couple of years. I think only I found fun. But I am trying to get back in the habit of, now that I'm doing more feature writing again at Euronews, I'm getting back in the habit of using it again.
I feel like we digressed some. We've gone from like the most tech heavy form of communicating media to squiggly lines on a page, but I do think it's useful to these guys. Charlotte has asked if the content writing was part of your PR charity work.
No, so I started doing content writing when I was educational consultant. I worked for a really fantastic organisation called The Key, and one of my colleagues once slightly disparagingly described it as like Yahoo Answers for schools, but it's so much cooler than that. It's basically like this massive bank of articles, like really clearly written articles for school leaders and school governors, so like head teachers. And I think like half the schools in the country are subscribed to it, and they can ask a question and then you reply. But you had a target to do sort of between 5 and 8 articles a day. So that would often involve calling the Department for Education, calling the ICO to ask questions about data protection, calling law firms to get answers, and then writing an article. It was really, very, very journalistic, but before I kind of had gone down that route. And it just taught me so much about speed, about clarity, and about research, and being really, really thorough. And that was actually, there is one key learning I had from there, which I think is something I've now repeated to everyone I've worked with, but especially when you start to work with subs, which is obviously something that's so, it's unique to our industry, working with sub editors. When I was at that job, we had subs as well. And I was constantly writing pieces that were good, but not perfect, because I was like, well, there's someone else who's going to make my writing perfect. And, we would actually get graded on our work, which is a whole other way of working it, and was really jarring for me when I first started. And working with a sub and recognizing what their role was, it wasn't to fix my mistakes, it was to catch tiny, tiny things. That was such a huge lesson for me. And it now means that, I'm sure my editors now would say, not all the time, but it now means that I really, really focus on ensuring that my copy is as clean as possible and kind of as perfect as possible, because it's not their job to rewrite stuff for me. It's their job to kind of spot absolutely tiny mistakes. And it really made me have, I don't know, a lot of pride in my work, and really make sure that I was as thorough as possible and as kind of responsible for my work as possible. And that's been really, really useful, actually, working in other jobs since, is them recognizing that, I guess.
Yeah, great. We've got 2 questions from Grace. Grace, feel free to unmute if you want to elaborate any more on this.
Thanks. Sorry, I've been cheeky with 2 there.
No, go. You can ask, go ahead and ask them if you'd like. I don't
want to Hi, Martha. I just wanted to, you can probably say I've got 2 down, which is, what are your views on having a niche as a journo or being a generalist? Because I hear such conflicting views, especially for me. I'm doing my NCTJ at News Associates in London right now, and working in PR, but trying to move. So a lot of what you said has been so helpful, and I really resonate with it. But a lot of people said that you have to find a niche because that's going to make you stand out more. But then a lot of people say be a generalist as well.
I'm going to be really unhelpful and be kind of both. So when I started my NCTJ, I didn't really want to be a reporter, a news reporter. That wasn't really what interested me. Obviously, if someone offered me an amazing news reporting job, I'd take it. But that wasn't so much what interested me. I thought, because my background is in education and kind of international development, that's the sort of space I want to be writing on. Being an education correspondent still would be amazing, but that was sort of where I thought I'd go. So my very first kind of pitches to my first kind of pictures that got published was kind of HuffPost and Guardian and Indie about education, because I was like, well, this is what I need to write on. But it's not everything that I'm interested in. I think this is the thing about being a specialist, is that nobody is one thing. If we were, I don't think we'd be journalists. I think that's the joy of journalism, is that it lets you cover all these different industries and all these different sectors all the time. Like, that's what I love about it. So for me, I've worked in niches, but I don't think there's anything that stops you from moving between them. I think there's a lot of value of working in a niche. So when I was at News Associates, I didn't do the sports course, but I did the normal multimedia one. But I worked a lot with Sportsbeat. So I did a lot of like shifts with them. I went and I covered triathlon in Portugal in my first kind of month of training there, which was fantastic. And that obviously helped. I have a background, long time ago. I was like a international athlete, which is really not who I am now. So sport was something I was interested in, but I knew I never wanted to just be a sports journalist. That wasn't ever something that was on my agenda, but I knew that it was something I was interested in. So I was very open to being a sports journalist, but that wasn't all I had to be. And actually it was James Toney, who's head of News Associates, or, you know, head of the whole group. I was chatting with him, and he has worked as a sports journalist only, as a news journalist only, and he's flipped back and forth loads. He's covered, I think, I knew I never wanted to just be a sports journalist. I can hear myself on YouTube. So yeah, he jumped between the two, and he was like, you never need to just do one. You know, you can move around as much as you like. So I think there's value of working in a niche, but you're never pigeonholed. You know, it doesn't look logical on paper that I went from BBC Sport to environmental journalism, and I have no background in environmental journalism. But it's just, I think the skills you get, you know, that I've said this so many times to colleagues, there is nothing more stressful ever than covering a live football match. It is so difficult. You've got to send the, I did this when I was covering the FA for Sportsbeat actually. You have to send the match report within 30 seconds of the whistle blowing. Like, nothing will prepare you for writing about hard news than that. You know, having a 400, and the very, very first match I ever covered was a women's FA game at Man City. And the whole game was really, you know, pretty standard. I think they were drawn like 0-0 or something. And then, so I'd written this whole thing about how dry it was and da-da-da-da-da. And then in the 91st minute and the 92nd minute, and then the whistle went, I think Man City scored 2 goals. And I had to suddenly write this whole new match report with 30 seconds until, you know, before it had to be sent. And that prepared me for then being able to write about the inauguration, or staying up the other day and watching Biden rejoin the Paris Agreement. There's nothing like sports journalism for getting me into that. And I think there's value in every single niche, but I don't think you're ever pigeonholed. I think you just need to look at the careers of people who've worked on like Newsround, for instance. They haven't stayed kids journalists or kind of, you know, children's news journalists. They've gone into culture, they've gone into presenting, they've gone into loads of different areas. And I think you'll find that if you look at a lot of people's backgrounds, you'll see that they've made similar kind of really interesting transitions. So that's my very long answer to that question.
No, that's great. Thank you. That's really, really helpful. And it's kind of what I was hoping you'd say, just because I'm struggling to think of what on earth a niche at my age should be. But anyway, that's great. The other question was, when starting out, do you think it's just a question of get your foot in the door and crack on with it, or, you know, oh, I really like what they're doing as in terms of their style, I should only apply to them, or just a few publications and really get to know them, or just kind of minesweep and go and try and get in anywhere?
I think there's value from anywhere. The very first job I was offered straight out of the end, when I was, you know, just finishing the NCJ, was at Mail Online, which isn't, you know, a lot of people have got a lot of views on the Daily Mail and on Mail Online. However, you know, as much as I would have loved a graduate job at The Guardian, they don't do them. You know, the publications that, you know, I would have said are the ones that I read really regularly, they don't do grad jobs. The Mail is one of the biggest hirers of, or Mail Online and Daily Mail, and The Sun actually. They're, you know, the 3 biggest hirers of grads. You know, they put a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of training into their grads, and they pay fairly as well. I didn't take it because it was in London and I didn't quite pay enough to justify moving back down. But I never thought going into my NCJ that I would apply for a job at Mail Online, let alone nearly take it. I then ended up, you know, working for Trinity Mirror and working for their kind of regional team. I was writing for kind of Hull Daily Mail and for Leeds Live and for all these different regionals. that again, like I never would have thought I would have been writing for like, and it's not anything against those publications, it's that I don't live in Hull and I have no connection to Nottingham, but I was writing for these places. And a lot of the time, you know, we were writing trending news. So a lot of it was kind of very consumer focused as well. So it was things like Aldi has just brought back its halloumi fries. Like that was one of the first articles I wrote. Really not what I was expecting going into journalism. But it was so useful because I got just, you know, I got bylines, which is great. I got to practice writing day in, day out. I got to practice reworking other people's writing, which was a really fascinating thing. That's quite an unusual thing to get to do, but that was great as well because we were sort of reworking other people's pieces. I learned another CMS system, you know, the sort of the back end of a site. I learned about audiences. I learned about what they wanted, what they didn't want, because a lot of people do want to read about halloumi fries coming back at Aldi. You know, that is a story with value. It might not, you know, be a piece that's going to win someone a massive award, but it is actually content that people are reading. And I think that's one of the biggest things for me. And I had a friend who was debating whether to take a job, I think between one kind of national paper or a very niche finance paper. And the national one was like overnight shifts covering something that he thought he was really interested in. And the other one was finance, but he hadn't really heard of the company. The pay was really good and the job looked really good, but he hadn't heard of them. And I said, that finance job looks amazing. Like, what a way to train in financial journalism. Like, what a skill set to have. And he went for the other one. He was there a month, absolutely hated it, ended up coming back to Manchester. And I think he really regretted not taking that other job. I mean, he's now doing fantastically in loads of other kind of areas, but I think he really regretted not taking that job with that slightly more unknown one. But I think he would have learnt so many skills there. And I think the person who did get that job I've now seen now works, I think, for the FT. So there's so many different places you can go. And if you're not writing the things you want to be writing for the places you want to be writing yet, these might be a stepping stone there. You know, if I had thought that writing articles about like halloumi fries would help me get in at Euronews, like I would have been so much more engaged at the time. And it was a bit of a mindset shift for me as well, because I was very like, I want to be here, I want to be here. I don't want to be like working my way up or anything, especially because it wasn't a grad job for me. I'd done that post-grad, you know, the kind of working my way up through 2 different companies at this point. So I felt very, very frustrated. But yeah, I think that's, again, I'm sitting here feeling like it's difficult when I'm sitting and I'm very, very happy where I am. But it's really interesting looking back on the places I did and the articles I wrote, that some of my friends will still like send me in birthday cards because they are like, some of my headlines are absolutely ridiculous. But I learned so much about working with an editor, audiences, and I don't think that matters where that is. I think work is work. And I think this is also one of the only industries where having a lot of different jobs on your CV is not a problem. No editor has ever looked at how much I've moved around and gone, oh God, no, like it's not like that. Whereas I know it is in other industries.
Thank you. I could go on, but that's so helpful and very much what I needed to hear right now. Yeah. Thanks.
I might open it up if anyone else wants to unmute and ask a question to like wrap up. We've got about 5 minutes left. So if anyone wants to, feel free. But if not, we will wrap up. Are we good? Is everyone good? I guess so. So yeah, I just want to thank Mart so much for joining us today. I think it's been more than useful to us and to these guys. So thank you very much. Where can people find you if they don't already follow you?
I'm on Twitter on @MartDeFerrer, and I've just started launching a newsletter about social media journalism as well. So please join me on there, because I basically couldn't bore the people around me with discussion of this anymore. But if that's what you like, please do sign up. But yeah, I'm on @MartDeFerrer on Twitter.
Cool.
Thank you so much for having me as well. That was really great getting to chat with people.
Yeah, I know we digressed quite a bit, but I think every bit of it was like worthwhile. So thank you so much. The next talk is at 4:15. It's with Aubrey Allegretti, who is a political correspondent for Sky News, and he formerly worked at The Times and Huffington Post. I think it's going to be really great. Zoom link should be in all of your inboxes. So got like 20-minute break, and I'll see you all there. Okay, cool. Okay,
Thanks very much.